Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We've got Donald Jeffries. The book is American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. Are now joined by author Donald Jeffries. Now, before we get into the book, first of all, I see that you just did my buddy Sam Tripoli's show, and that show can get a little wild. This one might be a little bit more conservative than that one. But before we get into the book, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose this as a topic.
The third volume of Hidden History. My first nonfiction book is Hidden History, and that's by far my bestseller. And I wanted to do a Hidden History 2, but for some reason the publisher didn't like me calling it Hidden History 2, so it was Crimes and Cover-Ups. That's the one Ron Paul wrote a foreword to. And this was basically Hidden History 3. And but again, they didn't like it, so it's an extension of what I wrote in those two books. It's kind of a combination. The Hidden History started with the JFK assassination and went up to the Obama years. Trump hadn't even entered the political scene in 2014, but Crimes and Cover-Ups was a prequel to that. We went back to the beginning of the Republic. So this, we go back to the beginning and we talk some more about judicial review and Thomas Jefferson and everything. We go all the way up to 9/11 and look at that again in Oklahoma City and JFK and all that stuff.
So let's talk about some of these events. And let's specifically go with my generation, right? So you mentioned Oklahoma City. You also mentioned 9/11. You did not mention the bombing of the World Trade Center back in 93. And I would argue a lot of those are really interconnected. I was wondering, do you touch on that, especially because when you look at the 93 World Trade Center bombing, had that gone another way, I would argue our 9/11 comes 8 years earlier. And when you look at Ahmed Salam, the informant and operative for the FBI on the inside with John Antisev and others, he's the one that basically supervised the building of this explosive device that went off, killed 8 people, and set this narrative of the blind sheik. But later on, you would get these audio tapes as Salam wanted to build a fake bomb, but they told him that he could not. This is when he got very suspicious, being a former Egyptian army officer, and started taping the conversations. So what are your thoughts on the 93 bombing?
Well, I actually did cover that in Hidden History, so we talked about that a lot. And yeah, I mean, they had an undercover asset that was there that tried to, he had more principles and morality than the FBI and our government did because he tried to back out. He didn't, somebody could get killed here, and I described the whole story in that. But you're right. I mean, I don't know exactly what they were trying to do there because it obviously wasn't as elaborate as what 9/11 was. So I'm not sure what they had planned and whether his reluctance made it less of a tragedy than it was. But you're absolutely right. That was kind of a precursor to 9/11.
So again, you have the next event before 9/11, Oklahoma City. There are a little bit more earmarks there and similarities, in my opinion, of the overall operation with 9/11 than the World Trade Center bombing, in the sense that you have ATF agents that are called and told not to come to work that day. You have drills going on. You clearly have explosives inside the building, even though it is denied after the fact. In fact, you can watch the bomb trucks go in, come and get those explosives. And even Frank Keating, who was the governor at the time, went on television and confirmed that those explosives had been taken out of the building. The story flips on its head to this truck bomb. And, I'm one of the guys that not only did Loose Change, but then followed it up with Fabled Enemies. When you look at the amount of evidence that you had that day alone from eyewitness accounts that had been documented, so much of that was not only, kind of memory hold, good title for the book, but if you brought it up later, you really demonized Donald.
Yeah, no, and we have a lot more about Oklahoma City in this book, and we dove deeper into it. And I mean, I don't know if it's still out there. It used to be online for a long time. They had the original local news coverage from Oklahoma City that had references over and over again to finding bombs in the building and bombs in the building. And you had somebody like General Ben Parton, who was the nation's premier expert, and he was a general on bombs who couldn't get on television back in the day. He was on Alex Jones, but nobody else would have him. And just say, this is look, I'm an expert on this. There was obviously this was not this giant magic fertilizer bomb, just kind of the magic bullet of Oklahoma City. There were explosives in there. And in this book, we go deeper into uh, a guy named Mike Loudenslager, who was a witness. We can't find him. I can't. His family, although he has an unusual last name, we couldn't get a hold of any of them. But this guy, to show you how deep the rabbit hole is, he was seen by multiple witnesses after whatever happened, whatever exploded, went off, uh, being a hero, rescuing people left and right, and also getting in heated argument with law enforcement. And people saw this. Lots of people saw this. Well, the official story eventually became if you mention Loudenslager to the government, if they tell you anything at all, they claim he was killed instantly in the blast while he was sitting at his desk, despite all those people that saw that. That's what you're dealing with, man. You're dealing with something that is it's hardcore lying, and I hope to have on my podcast, I hope to have the widow of Clarence Yeakey, who is a heroic law officer who was committed the strangest suicide of all time. I went into that in Hidden History, who again had been talking about Loudenslager and had been talking about, hey, this is, what are you guys doing? You're covering up and everything. And his widow reached out to me on Twitter. I was shocked. She somehow knew about me, and I hope I'm going to have her on the show because she's been reluctant to talk. We're working something out there, but there's so much involved in this. And it was really a precursor to 9/11. It was kind of a dress rehearsal. And if you remember, at that time, this came on the heels of Ross Perot's showing in the 1992 election. The country was ripe for a third party movement. He got 19% of the vote, even with the strange withdrawing and then coming back. He was actually ahead in the polls for a long time. People were fed up with the Democrats and the Republicans, and Bill Clinton gets in because of the third party, I guess. And as soon as this happened, Bill Clinton, who invented modern identity politics, he transformed the Democrats into what they are today, and he instantly blamed the militia groups, which were again getting more powerful at that time, and demonized talk radio and Rush Limbaugh and people like that. And that's what you see today. The woke left learned from that, and that's how they react to everything. They instantly blamed, this is why this happened. See, we have to stop this, and because of that, I think the third party movement died. And you saw Ross Perot only got 8%, still pretty good in 1996. But until Donald Trump, you really heard nothing more from independent politics in presidential elections.
Well, it was also, a precursor for how the media would treat political candidates. Perot did get a lot of media coverage the first time around, and I remember the second time
Mm-hmm.
around, not so much. And really,
Mm-mm.
they had really played on the media darling aspect of Bill Clinton. They saw that that worked with the Arsenio Hall. They kept running with it. He was stopping at
Yeah.
McDonald's and having Big Macs, and he was the everyman. Again, much different time period where we're not encompassed in more than a dozen channels. Actually, we might have had 30 channels by about that time. Certainly not a DVR world and not multiple news networks running 24/7. CNN was really the only game in town. We didn't see that kind of start actually until the Clinton sex scandal later on. It's interesting. I've never heard somebody talk about Ross Perot in regards to the 1995 bombing, but like you said, you had this demonization of the quote unquote militia movement. And you see
Mm-hmm.
later on where it goes after Homeland Security is established and things like the MIAC report comes out, and it's the same thing. Militia groups, now they've gone after Ron Paul. Now, if you have the Gadsden flag, you're a domestic terrorist or threat, etc. I do remember at the time, one of the same things is they would always try to point to the Turner Diaries to make everything anti-Semitic, and that's something they
Yes.
also
Yes.
featured
Mm-hmm.
in 1995 with Timothy McVeigh. So when we talk about McVeigh, that's an interesting character because actually, you mentioned that news footage. If you want to see it, folks, I've still got it. It's in my film Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined for free. You can watch I don't know. I probably got about 3 minutes of cut clips, including the
Mhm.
Keating clip. But later on, you number one, you would have at least two people on the scene, and even the FBI looking for this second person in regards to the bombing. You then have magically all the CCTV camera footage gets rounded up. They say it doesn't show anything. Later on, when they have to release it, they release very little, and they say don't know where the rest are. And then we're talking 15, 20 years down the line when that even happens. And then you got McVeigh himself. And I highlight this in the film because you have two aspects here. Number one, McVeigh told I believe it was his sister, that he was working black operations. And basically, he was a spook. Now, he did have a military background. And I remember
Yes.
when Hustler did that story, because there was this video that came out where after McVeigh had supposedly been, I believe, dishonorably discharged, he appears to be on this base that actually is working with ordnances and explosives, and he's working inside of a tank long after he's not supposed to be in the military. What are your takes on all those aspects, and do you get into them in the book?
Yeah, we'll certainly look a little deeper at McVeigh. And as someone, I got my start working as a teenage volunteer in the mid 1970s for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry. He was my hero. I became a civil libertarian because of him. He was the most famous critic of the Warren Report, Rush to Judgment. And there are lots of aspects, because I know so much about the Kennedy assassination. I'm aware that Lee Harvey Oswald was impersonated constantly, not only in Dallas but in New Orleans as well, by people who were obviously trying to make people remember the name Oswald. I mean, clearly wasn't Oswald, because the real Oswald was in different places at that time. But researching this book, we found, and again, I owe a great tip of the hat to Chris Graves and Peter Seacosh, who did wonderful work researching for me. But we found that Timothy McVeigh had been impersonated as well. And one of the most interesting impersonations occurred in front of the owner of the person that was running the preschool in the building, in the Mirror building. As you know, there was much made of that. The kids were killed and it was awful and everything. But she mysteriously resigned shortly before the Oklahoma City bombing, and we've been unable to track her. The grand jury couldn't find her. I don't know if she's alive or not, but she has disappeared into the memory hole. You cannot find her. I'd love to question her. But she, again, a guy named McVeigh, purporting to be McVeigh, visited the preschool, asked a lot of, kind of charged questions about, how many kids do you have here? And just, and I don't remember the exact quotes, but it was a clear inference that, with another case where somebody named McVeigh, he met somebody else and he spelled his name for him, said, remember that name. You're going to remember it, or something like that. It's the exact same kind of thing we saw with the people impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald. So McVeigh was clearly being impersonated, but his trial was the first time I believe we saw the negative impact of witness impact statements. He received one of the most unfair trials in the history of jurisprudence. I've written a lot about that. I wrote a lot about it in Hidden History, but the prosecution didn't even put him at the scene of the crime. Now he was there, I think, but they couldn't have any witness testify to that, because every single witness who saw him in the company of this John Doe number two, who they wanted. I mean, even Janet Reno mentioned John Doe number two, but again, he was flushed down the memory hole when they decided to make him a lone nut. Although they drew this guy Terry Nichols in, there's absolutely no evidence at all that this guy was involved in a bomb. He knew McVeigh. That was about it. But if you followed his trial, you mentioned the Turner Diaries. That's the kind of evidence that was used against him. They introduced the Spotlight newspaper. I was a subscriber to that back then, and I now write for the American Free Press, which is what the Spotlight became after it was driven into bankruptcy by the Anti-Defamation League. But this was considered evidence. They said, "Look what this guy's reading," and that ought to terrify all of us. But we see what happened in the show trials of Alex Jones, for instance. That's the kind of stuff. Remember, if you watched any of that, they would show the commercials they ran and what they said. This is where we are now, where this is considered evidence. Look, so if you or I were to go on trial for thought crimes, I mean, they'd have a wealth of material. They could play all kinds of clips of us saying this or that. And me, I've got 10 books out now, tons of articles on Substack that they could draw from. It ought to frighten everyone that did it. But I think this is the first time we saw something like that, because whatever you think of the Turner Diaries or anything like that, it's that doesn't that's not has nothing to do with committing a crime unless it's a thought crime. So it was his trial was very disturbing on all levels. And during while I was writing, so one of the few people I was able to get in touch with by telephone, because my researchers found a lot of these people, but most of the time their phones have been disconnected. No one will talk. Timothy McVeigh's father actually answered when I called his house, and I
Hold on
had
one
maybe a
second,
30
Donald.
second.
Before we get into that, we got to
Yeah.
take a break. I think that's a good
Okay.
place to break it off.
Okay.
I'd love to hear what McVeigh's father had to say about his son and his involvement in this. And also, I do want to get your take on who this John Doe 2 may have been, more making sense of the madness after this.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most precious assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott Precious Metals at 720-605-3900. That's 720-605-3900.
Looking to give your wardrobe an upgrade? Well, look no further. Here at God Country & Kin, we've got you covered from head to toe, from shoulder to shoulder, and everything in between. Introducing our brand new Patriotic Collection, designed to display your patriotic spirit with a stylish look that's sure to turn heads. And the best part is, you don't have to break the bank to be your best you. Why wait? Visit us online or in-store today and elevate your style with God Country & Kin. God Country & Kin, where patriotism meets style. Shop now. Visit the Patriot TV store and look for the God Country Kin banner to find the perfect outfit, shirt, accessory, or maybe a great hat. You can totally see yourself rocking this hat. I know you can. And check out all the great stuff we've got to show your patriotism at patriot.tv.store. Click that link above that says store and join me there at the Patriot TV store.
We are back with Donald Jeffries. And Donald, you were saying that, during your investigative work on the OKC bombing, one of the people you were able to get a hold of was McVeigh's father. Please tell us about it.
Hopefully I didn't tease people too much, but it was about a 30-second conversation. I mean, you could tell, and when you do get through to these guys, you can see the fear is still there. I mean, because I tried to quickly, I can talk fast if I need to. I tried to quickly say, "Look, I think your son was a patsy," and so but although he probably realizes anybody calling at this point is someone like that, but he hesitated for a minute. He goes, "No, I better not say anything." Something like that, and then hung up. But so it was. I tried to get in touch with his sister too. His sister changed her name, and she lives, I think, somewhere down south. I think she's a school teacher, but again, it was unsuccessful at doing that. But even if you do, these people are not, they're typically not going to talk. But McVeigh is a very strange case because this is, and I wrote more about that in Hidden History about when he, right before he died, or right before and they really executed him in record time. He wasn't waiting on death row for 20 years like so many of these guys are. But this book came out that had all these incredibly inflammatory quotes where he called the children in the daycare center collateral damage and all this kind of stuff. That there's no evidence he ever said that. There's no video or audio of him. So this was really disturbing that after they executed the guy, they tried to make it look like he was a cold, calculated killer. And I don't understand McVeigh because I don't know why he didn't testify at the trial. And as you mentioned, he was in the military, and he told his sister one thing. I think he was probably I don't know if he was MK Ultra, but I think he was some kind of asset, or had been maybe he had been shipped or so. I don't know, but something, because he didn't act right afterwards. He didn't. Oswald at least was saying I didn't kill anybody. But McVeigh was just kind of very stoic and sitting there, and so. It's a very, and I would love to talk to Terry Nichols, but he's hard to get a hold of, and I don't know. I know someone who does talk to him, but I don't know that he's saying much either. And he had a brother, James Nichols, who was very outspoken, and he died. Wasn't that old. So unfortunately, a lot of these people don't tend to live long. So that's when you're researching these things, you're looking and saying, okay, he's no longer here with us. But I did have Representative Charles Key on the program. He's still around. He did a great job. He was part of the state legislature that started the grand jury. And he's a great guest, but people can watch my podcast. I've had him on a couple times, but again, if he couldn't with his resources find a lot of these people, obviously I couldn't. So we're just basically sifting through material, finding what we can, and I think drawing the logical conclusions for this stuff.
Did McVeigh give any interviews after being incarcerated? A
No,
videotaped ones?
no, and that
Nothing.
was no, and that's what I said was this is what we find, and we found that you can even say about John Hinckley or Mark David Chapman is that the same media that wants to, you'd think they'd want to interview these people, but they don't. In fact, I think it was Hinckley. I think it was Hinckley. Well, one of them was requesting Barbara Walters and all these people to interview him, and they had no interest. I mean, can you imagine they didn't want to interview these people? And again, that's because they have some very disquieting connections and background as well. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen an interview with McVeigh because it really it really made me, it sent, tingles up my spine at the time because he was reading a lot of the stuff I was reading at that time. Especially the Spotlight. He advertised in the Spotlight and stuff, and I thought, wow, this is are they going to start coming after Spotlight subscribers? And that's that's the danger we have. But you can see that was kind of an early, and that's why in this book, American Memory Hole, I talk about how this is when you see the cancel culture that exists today, where they're going after the big names in alt media, and they already have. They deplatformed Alex Jones and so many others from YouTube. They did it on Twitter for a long time. Facebook is, I'm shadow banned everywhere. But the bigger names are gone. But this goes back to FDR. We talk in American Memory Hole how he invented cancel culture. So it was going on even to that day where he was getting his critics fired from radio stations and newspapers and magazines, or telling people not to hire them. And so you go to the 1990s, that kind of stuff was going on as well because they were basically demonizing anybody that would read this extremist right-wing material. And this was just before the internet. The internet really hit mid to late 90s when it first came in near the end of the Clinton administration. Of course, it was conspiracy central because the Clintons were they were churning out stories left and right because they were just nonstop scandals. But so the internet had a field day with the Clinton body count and all that. But at that time, they couldn't stop what was happening. So this is what has culminated when social media. They finally found a way because they've been beside themselves that we had basically, I don't know, 20 years of unfettered kind of Wild West internet where there was very little control in any of us. They hate the fact that any of us can just, start a blog. Now they have Substack, which that's the only place I'm not shadow banned on. And I really fear they're going to get to that because this terrifies them. The prospect of having just any unwashed masses, any common riffraff going on and typing something and giving their opinion about some topic of the day without being filtered by one of their overpaid talking heads, a mouthpiece for the state. So this why I think when you look at a book like this or any of the history books I write, we need to be reminded we didn't get here by accident. All these things are connected. There's a timeline, so these things all have something to do with each other, and you can certainly see in the 1990s the way Bill Clinton was trying to demonize right-wing extremists, as he would call them, and talk radio, and which really weren't that extreme at all, but they were a little bit of an alternative to the mainstream media. And certainly by the time the internet rolled around, they were beside themselves, but they couldn't do anything about it until, unfortunately, they finally were able to deplatform people from the social media that we all need to try to, to get our voice out to people.
It's the modern day communications. So let's move on to 9/11. Like you said, Oklahoma City, very much a precursor into many of the regards in the way that occurred. This happens shortly after a very highly contested election. In fact, the most contested election of my lifetime up until that point, with the hanging chads and the fact that we had recounts, etc. Also, the fact that you had Jeb Bush as the governor of Florida, where this was all taking place. There was a lot going on. And really the last thing on most people's mind was some kind of a Middle Eastern terrorist attack, right? Although the narrative
Right.
had slowly shifted from Russia, very much in the 80s and the early 90s, to the Middle East somewhat. The Gulf War was a flash in the pan. You know, to many people, it was really quick. It was the first real look at 24-hour war on CNN. But this wasn't something that was going on for years, right? I mean, it was really there to say, hey, we're big dick swinging and we're going to do whatever we want, wherever we want. We're going to do it quick. And
Right. Well, it
everybody
wasn't
was like,
yeah.
okay, great. Sounds good. You know, late 90s, economy is rocking. I mean, gas is under $1. I'm in college.
Right.
I'm being promised I'm going to make 6 figures in my graphic design gig.
Mhm.
All these things are looking up. All of a sudden you wake up and the internet is booming. I mean, eBay is making people rich from selling stuff at home. There's all these new dynamics going on. 9/11 happens. By this time, there's about 60 to 100 channels, and 4 of them are running 24/7. Well, that changes really quick because as soon as 9/11 happens, every channel's 9/11. All programming ends for a good week, by the way, on every single major network. So prior to the COVID 1984 nightmare, that even then had much more of a slow burn and a preparation for you, this is the most impactful media psyops moment of my lifetime. And as a day, no doubt about it, hands down, forget about it. So when you look at all those aspects, you know, what is your overall take of 9/11? What do you focus on in the book?
Well, this was the millennials, JFK assassination, basically writ large. I mean, a much bigger thing. But when I refer to America, when I'm writing, I refer to it, what we're living in now is America 2.0. And the old America is America 1.0. With all its faults, it was, you know, a utopia compared to what we have now. But I think that you can trace the birth of America 2.0 to 9/11. I think what happened afterwards, because it was so unprecedented, and the lies were just coming so fast and furious. And in the wake of it, when you created the Patriot Act, which really opened the door to the kind of censorship we see going on now. Most people still, I'm not even sure what all was in the Patriot Act, but there's a lot of bad stuff in there. And I'm sure none of the people that voted for it read it because they don't typically read these things. And then you had the creation of Homeland Security, which somehow we managed to get along without it for, almost 102, over 200 years. Somehow we managed to get along without it. But suddenly
Over
now we need it, and you don't hear
225
anyone.
years. Just so over
Exactly. So
225 years. And you know what?
yeah,
We got to take a break. But before we do, I do want to emphasize this about Homeland Security because there are a slew of other things that came along with the Patriot Act, right? Military Commissions Act, National Defense Authorization, et cetera.
yes,
And when
yes.
you get to Homeland Security, it also absorbs the border, right? And look, the Border Patrol wasn't perfect back in the day, folks. Look where it's gone now. And every time I bring that up to one of my conservative-leaning guests, they have to agree with me, but then they want to reform that agency. There's nothing to reform. It needs to be eviscerated, eliminated. It should have never... Deutschland security never needed to exist in this country. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back with Donald Jeffries. After this, more Making Sense of the Madness.
Did you know that thousands of authors across the country have written books and published them with Page Publishing? If you've written a book, Page Publishing can help you through the process. We cut through the confusion of the publishing world to make it easy for you. If we decide to publish your book, your work ends and ours begins. From copy editing and proofing to typesetting and book cover art, we get you printed, distributed, and sold on Amazon, Apple iTunes, and in bookstores across the country. We'll even help you promote your book. That's right, we do all this for you. Biography, self-help, mystery, novels, sci-fi, even a children's book. No matter what genre, Page Publishing can bring your book to life. Call today for your free author submission kit and find out how you can be the next published author at Page Publishing.
Call for your free author submission kit at 855-993-2114. That's 855-993-2114.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
And we are back with Donald Jeffries. I'm sorry I cut you off, sir, when you were talking about Homeland Security. But Homeland Security to me
Yeah.
is especially egregious because you not only set up this authoritarian Nazi-like Gestapo agency, but then it absorbs these other things and it expands through fusion centers, which aren't even
Mhm.
government agencies. It's kind of this murky sub territory of contract. It's not quite Stratfor, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, it has this plausible deniability circle that's making everything work together with local law enforcement. And really, it's those fusion centers where we get the first taste and leaks, that MIAC, that Missouri report, 2008, 2009, where you really get to see exactly what Homeland Security was set up for. You, American citizens,
Yeah.
period, amen. At the end of the day, it's an agency that was built to make us the domestic terrorists. And now they're
Yes.
just saying it out in the open 20 plus years later.
Yes.
Now it's a big gag.
Yep.
It's not the
Yep.
outward threat, it's the inward threat. It's the extremists. It's
Yeah.
the same thing we were warning about from the very beginning when they were demonizing people with beards and turbans that didn't look or sound like you. And now it's everybody that looks and sounds like you.
Yeah, exactly. And COVID can be accredited with killing one thing, and that's the terrorism, because terrorism has disappeared, and they just kind of merged seamlessly, went right from oh, everybody's a terrorist, and what is it, if you're George W. said, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. That was his line, and it's you see now that we have become the enemy. And so the Homeland Security Department is necessary. I've tried to ask, what do some of these agencies do? Like, for instance, what is FEMA, Federal Emergency? What do they do in non-emergency situations, which is most of the time, right? I don't. What are we paying them for? I don't know. But Homeland Security, what do they do that hadn't been done before? And I think you answered it. They monitor us, and now when we again this ongoing conspiracy, which is what it is, when you see how it gradually morphs from, so after 9/11, we had the Patriot Act and Homeland Security, and you had free speech zones for the first time. And that's another asterisk you put on free speech. And now we see that's really in the news because free speech is under attack like it never has been before. I just wrote an article about that where I found in the New York Times alone in the last month, there have been two different editorials with the same theme, which is everywhere. That the First Amendment goes too far. The Constitution's out of control. The Bill of Rights, because that's what they're concerned about. And the Bill of Rights is not, you cannot have a Bill of Rights and have what you've built after 9/11 in this post 9/11 world. And we're seeing that. And so what happened was, the Trump was an aberration because 4 years of that was just, I mean, we can analyze that forever, but I mean, nobody knows. It was all over the place. It was kind of a giant food fight and constantly, trying to impeach him every other day and so forth. But once Biden got in there, then you saw again the next step in the progression. And so you're right. Everything's about domestic terrorists or white supremacists. And then with January 6th, obviously that opened the door. So we're insurrectionists, and this just gets stepped up another level, and civil liberties get left behind. When I was a teenager, I was a card carrying member of the ACLU. I came from the far left. I was a real radical, and I admire them, because they were defending free speech, and they don't care at all about free speech now, because they're not saying anything about the treatment of the January 6th prisoners who've been denied all due process now for over 3 years, and some of them that were given show trials were given ridiculous sentences, but all this possible, I think, because if 9/11 hadn't happened, I don't think any of the rest of this would either. People bought it, and of course, we examine in this book. We go back again in Hidden History. I go over a lot of the of the story and how absurd it is and so forth. Everybody knows that. And Building 7 collapsed. In this book, for instance, we talk about Building 6, which
Yep.
people don't normally talk about. That's where all the
Well,
gold was that
let me stop
disappeared.
you. Let me stop because it's so
Yeah,
important for people to understand that that complex is so large. Now,
yeah.
on the record with Building 6, one of the things that the debunkers love to say is there's no evidence of the molten metal that the firefighters talked about, etc. What they don't talk about is Ken Holden of FEMA in testimony. I've got it in Loose Change Final Cut. Anybody can go watch it. This guy's given an official report about Building 6 and the molten metal still dripping there. Excuse me? Why is there molten
Hmm.
metal in Building 6? Now, when you look at the overhead view of that, there appears from the middle to be scooped out, not that something fell in on it and there is debris on top of it, but that a separate explosion seems to have happened. And I would also argue there is video evidence as one of the towers collapse of that possible secondary explosion, as there is a large plume to the side where that building is located, and the damage seems to have occurred during that. But again, you can't even say that. You can't talk about, everybody talks about Willie Rodriguez when they talk about the basement level explosions.
Hmm.
Anthony
Yep.
Saltalamacia was there with Willie Rodriguez as well. I often put that
Yeah.
interview out, and nobody wants to acknowledge that. I'm the guy that interviewed Barry Jennings from Building 7. He was with
Yes.
Michael Hess, who is the city corporation counsel
Yes.
of
Yes.
Rudy Giuliani in that building. Believe me, I tried to get Hess on the record too. No bueno. So
I
please,
couldn't get him either.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, he didn't want to talk.
Yeah. Wait,
Hess went on television that day and talked about the explosion
yeah.
in Building
Yeah.
7 with him. That's the only reason I knew who he was. Go back to Building 6. What did you find there?
Well, again, we have, and again, I can't believe I'm blanking out on the guy's name. Maybe you'll know it, but there was a guy that worked there that first talked about the gold being disappearing. The gold vaults had disappeared, and I don't know how many billions of dollars or whatever gold. I think Giuliani even talked about that as well. But this guy, maybe it'll ring a bell in your name. I have so many of these names I'm forgetting, but he ended up being. I think they attempted to frame him for the murder of his wife, and they were going to charge him with it. And he ended up escaping and fled to Argentina. I think he's still in Argentina now. But I have lots of quotes from him in the book, and I can't believe I'm not remembering his name. But he, there's something obviously was happening there. As you said, this is a big complex, and so Building 7 is problematic enough because you're going to accept this fairy tale that on September 11th, 2001, for the first time in history, uh, a high-rise metal frame building collapsed from fire, and two did that day, and actually three did because Building 7 wasn't hit by anything, but somehow that collapsed as well, and none have since. So apparently the laws were operating differently that day, but there's so many problems with the story because we have. I talk in the book about the Naudet brothers, who just happened to catch the impact. They put their camera up right as the plane was hitting. It's the only shot we have of the first airliner hitting the Twin Towers. And they immediately ran over to the tower that had been struck, the North Tower, I think. And they went inside the lobby, and we were told that they stopped filming because they didn't want people to see the people running around on fire. I think, wait, how is that possible? This thing hit supposedly 80 stories above. Why would people be on fire in the lobby? It makes no sense. Of course, they didn't film it, so we don't know. But of course, later their
Well, let me
explanation
say
was, well,
this. We actually do
Mhm.
know because Felipe, I forget what his name is. Again, there's so many of these names. He's the
Mhm.
guy that Saltalamacia and Willie Rodriguez rescued. It's acknowledged. And I have him in the hospital after the fact being recorded by the media, severely burned. This was a guy that was
Mhm.
basement level coming up to the main level so
Yeah.
that they could basically take him out. I have the whole story. Again, South La Mesa talks about it. He comes in, he's shocked. The skin is burned off of his body. They throw a blanket over him. The other thing about that Naudet footage that people need to realize, and I guess it would be hard to unless you'd been there, and I had been as a kid several times. Um, the lobby's blown apart. Like the marble
Yeah.
walls are blown off. Some of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
windows on the base level are knocked out. Folks, that glass, I mean, it like this marble, it hit 70 plus floors up. There were people
Yeah.
in lower levels that had no idea what went on.
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
absurdity is beyond reproach. And the thing is that once you have explosives inside those buildings, really the hijackings become window dressing and extremely questionable. And why would they be there in the
Yes.
first place? Because if the impact is to kill so many people, they blow those two buildings up in the middle of Manhattan without anybody knowing. You're talking about 100,000 people dead. Like, you're talking
Yeah.
about the kind of mess you could not even imagine. And that's the other really odd aspect of 9/11 that nobody wants to talk about. When you look at the overall casualties, the fact that the majority of the planes were like at half capacity, right?
Yes.
The fact
Yes.
that
Yes.
people were able to get out of the building. Let's just say it was a black operation. How do you sell it to the people that aren't like totally on board, that have to be a part of? Well, we're going to minimize the casualties. We got to take one last break, Donald. I want to talk 9/11 a little bit more, but then I want to talk about modern day. You mentioned Trump. We've got this assassination attempt. We've got the last election, the new election coming up. I'd love for you to give it a little historical reference. Final segment of Making Sense of the Madness after this.
I don't know about you, but I have to have that cup of coffee in the morning. And Kingdom Cup is mold-free, it is pesticide-free, and it is organic. It's got this flavor that is delicious. You don't even have to put cream or sweetener in it.
Why did we go with the bean form, the whole bean? Because ultimately the powder form is the one that gathers the most moisture. And that means the more potential mold development. This is actually organic, mold-free, certified. That's important because ultimately people drink coffee, it's cultural. And so we tried to meet the culture where it is and create a healthy alternative.
Make the healthy choice for you and your family. Try mold-free, pesticide-free, and it's organic. Delicious Kingdom Cup coffee. And it's available now at the Patriot TV store. Go to patriot.tv and click on store. You'll find Kingdom Cup coffee in the health and wellness section. Order Kingdom Cup coffee at the Patriot TV store now.
Attention business owners, are you ready to advertise to millions of loyal patriots ready to buy your products or services? Here is your golden chance to advertise with Jason Burmis and connect with his massive audience on Patriot TV and his incredibly loyal social media followers. As an advertiser on Making Sense of the Madness, you also reach his followers on the top social media sites. As Jason dives into complex current events and conspiracies, offering investigative analysis and thought-provoking discussions to uncover the deeper truths behind the headlines. When you advertise with Jason on Making Sense of the Madness, you're aligning your brand with integrity, loyalty, and a dedication to truth. Jason's audience is passionate, conservative, and committed to the values your business stands for. When given the choice, Jason's followers will buy your products or services over other woke companies. Don't miss this opportunity to elevate your brand with the power of Patriot TV. Reach out to us today at advertise@patriot.tv.
And we are back with Donald Jeffries. Donald, what else would you like to say about 9/11?
Well, first of all, I did remember the name now. Okay, I think his name was Kurt Sonnenfeld. I believe that's the guy that fled to Argentina. But his story is fascinating. People can read about it in the book. But you mentioned the planes being half capacity, and that's another. There's so many strange elements to this day. And we talk a little bit about it. We go into the fact that there were an unbelievable number of celebrities that claimed that they were going to fly on one of those planes, and they backed out at the last minute. And in fact, there was an inordinate number of cancellations, and that appears to be why they were at half capacity or less. And that's just, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. Just some of the things we found make no
Well,
sense at
Donald,
all.
I gotta
I'm
stop
all
you again. You know what I know? I know that Willie
what?
Brown got a call.
Oh
Kamala
yes,
Harris
yeah, that's
is,
yeah. Oh yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Willie
Don't fly
Brown,
that day. Yeah,
my mayor of San Francisco, confirmed it
Condoleezza
and then
Rice, I
denied it
believe, told
later.
him. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
you can talk about all the other stuff that day. He got the call that day. That's the mayor of
yes,
San
he did.
Francisco.
Yep.
Still around today, folks. Go ahead, Donald.
No, and Willie Brown's great because he's one of those guys that talks. We don't know when, and he said, yeah, Condoleezza Rice told me and said not to fly. I said, okay, that's cool. But there's so many, like for instance, I've always wondered about the jumpers and why they stopped showing them. I just thought that was curious because I thought, and I talk about it in the book that I find it hard to believe that that many people would become suicidal that quickly. I mean, did they really think that? Why would they assume that there's no hope? I would think they might think there'd be planes coming in with hoses on them and stuff. I would be thinking if I was there. But we found. I looked at one of these government reports while I was writing this book. Did you know the first person jumped 4 minutes after the impact of the first plane? Now, how could somebody possibly become suicidal in 4 minutes? So I don't know if that's fake. They throw so many of these fake things out there just to make people think. But there's so many
Well,
rabbit
let me
hole
just say this,
elements.
because obviously you're alluding to the fact that maybe some people were taken out inside of the building. A lot of people talk about John O'Neill, for instance, security,
Yes,
and a lot of
yes,
those
yes.
documents. I don't
Yep.
know if you're familiar with the Dark Overlord document dumps 1 through 3 from I think January 2018, almost 5 years ago. But those had a lot of the lawsuits. Especially with Larry Silverstein, that had never come out. It
Yes,
had the
yes,
James
yes,
Woods testimony in it, so you found
yes.
out
Yeah, we have that
who
in the book.
gave
Yeah.
him, yeah, who gave him those names. So in other words, who he talked to within the FBI that actually said, yes, you were on the plane with these guys in August. He
Yeah.
also said that it was Flight 11. Um, I forgot where I was going with this. What were we just talking about in the very beginning? I'm sorry, I get off.
Uh, before, yeah, God, what we were talking about. We were talking about, I guess, before that, I was mentioning about the celebrities and the capacity of the
Yeah,
planes, and
no,
then
it
I
was
went right
after
to
the
the.
celebrity stuff and the warning stuff. And I mean, there's the drill stuff on top of it. But when the documentation came out with all of this stuff, no one's talked about it. No one's gotten prosecuted. There's no real investigations into this stuff.
No,
I know what we're
no.
talking about. We're talking about the jumpers. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
yes.
yes, I have a firefighter in Loose Change Final Cut. His name is you know I can't remember his name, but he's in there and he's talking about how when he was going up and clearing out the building and the explosions are happening and rattling them around, they went into a room to clear it and there was just a dead body in the closet. He goes, I don't know what that was about.
Mm.
He goes, I everything was so crazy. This guy had obviously been killed, and they found the dead body in the closet as they went
Yeah, how
down
about
before
that?
the towers went down. That's what I wanted to say. Folks, you can't like why would that guy make it up? And you know what? He got demonized
Exactly.
by the fire department for using cocaine. I got news for you guys.
Yep.
If you're a Long Island firefighter or a New York City firefighter, 99.9% chance you've used cocaine before. Go ahead, Donald.
Yeah, and this book and I'm sure you're well aware of that. Being with Loose Change, and I had Dylan Avery on my podcast, and he was when you talked about Barry Jennings. I'm sure you know that he told me that he had hired a private investigator to see what happened to Jennings' family. I said his family, and the private investigator came back a little ways later and said, "Never call me again." It's like what? I mean, talk about conspiracy 101. What does that even mean?
Well, let's
But
take it
we
even
know that.
further. So
Yeah.
Dylan and I are the ones that went into his office where he had the key to the city, everybody. Okay. He had the gold key to the city. We took him
Mhm.
out on the pier. We did this interview. He was excited to talk to us. He had actually seen Loose Change second edition. So, he had also told us, and you're watching in the interview, that he did go talk to officials that seemed very important. They never came back to him. He had told them what he thought, all these different
Yeah.
things. So then the BBC comes out with their hit piece. and they go and get Barry Jennings to recant on camera. Now, Dylan, we
Yeah.
had some of the first video camera, like he had a DivX phone. I'll never forget it. This is before the iPhone, everybody. And he had Barry on there saying it, and he brought it up, and to their credit, they played it in the interview. Now, the 6th anniversary of 9/11 comes up, and we're down in New York City, and I run into the scumbag BBC producer / journalist, and we had been trying to get a hold of Barry at the time. This is before the private investigator, and we couldn't get a hold of him. And I said, hey, we've been trying now for months to get a hold of Barry Jennings. He doesn't seem to be at the office he worked at, all these different things. Oh, I'm sure he's fine. After they do, before he does the investigation, we're told that Barry Jennings dies of fast-acting leukemia. Okay? And I believe even before that, Dylan called up looking for him and supposedly got his mother, and she told him he was dead. Now, that's when the private investigator thing goes on. By that time, I was working on another film. I was not involved in that. But yes, I see Dylan probably 2-3 times a year, and that absolutely happened, Donald.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's just something like when you just look at the hard facts that there were over 150 firefighters that we have on the record as hearing explosions in the building, and I recounted a lot of that in the book, and I haven't been able to get a hold. Like Louis Caccioli was very outspoken. I couldn't get a hold of him. I don't know if some of these people are not. April Gallup, for instance, about the Pentagon, she sued them afterwards, and I
We
couldn't get a hold
interviewed
of her. So I don't know.
April was
Yeah,
set to be in Loose Change Final Cut, and just because of whatever reason, we just couldn't work out
she
the
already
deal.
backed
We
out.
spent a couple days
Yeah.
with April Gallup. For
Hmm.
those that don't know, April Gallup walked out of the hole in the Pentagon with her son, who was in the Pentagon
Yep.
with her at daycare, before the front face of the building collapses, about 32 to 36 minutes from that impact. Donald, we got 5 minutes left in the broadcast. Let's bring it full circle to where we are today. Donald Trump's imperfect for sure, but they obviously don't like him. You mentioned the impeachments. They just tried to blow his head off on television. In these final 5 minutes, what are your thoughts on Trump?
Well, I call it. I'm a Trump agnostic. We're the smallest minority group in the world, so I get it from both sides. Mostly people perceive me as being a supporter of Trump, which I was, and I voted for him. But he is definitely imperfect. But right now he represents the face of the opposition, whatever that opposition is. And obviously he's preferable in terms of when you see how insane the other side is. But we talk about something like his assassination attempts, and having studied assassinations for a long time, I'm just amazed and I wrote about it on Substack very early on, that this story has already been sent down the memory hole. I mean, the shooting was maybe in the news for a couple weeks, maybe, and then it's gone. Trump talked about it at the convention, saying, "I wanted to talk about one time," and that was it. He doesn't talk about it. You figured that Iwo Jima style photo would be his campaign, photo. No one's talking about it. The other side certainly isn't. And what's really hilarious is that you have, I had a friend so many of the people that I know in my real life think I'm nuts, because I've been down these rabbit holes for a long time. And he texted me right after the shooting, says, "Well, I hope you're going to write something about the fake Trump shooting." So I realized this guy doesn't think anything's fake. And then you had something Keith Olbermann, Joy Reid, Rosie O'Donnell publicly coming out and just, cavalierly saying, "No, this never happened. It was staged." And these
Let
are
me
the same
stop you.
people that
Let
want
me
to
stop
process.
you.
Yeah,
Because I am the
yeah,
same way. I'm totally agnostic, and I voted for the guy, right? But I'm
yeah,
not
me
afraid
too.
to call him out on policy with
Yeah,
Israel, with
yeah,
Iran, with the COVID 1984 nightmare. You've got to do that. I'm not here to bootlick, but at the same time, I've got to acknowledge more money in my pocket, less wars, better common sense policy, all those things. In the stage thing arena, this thing happened after 9/11, where first they demonized the word truth, right? They tried with the 9/11 denier and the kook and the conspiracy. Now it's truther. And then they tried to
yeah,
associate truther with questioning every event and not questioning it the way we did 9/11, but everything is
yeah.
staged. Started with the Boston bombing. Nobody was hurt in the
Right,
Boston bombing.
right, right,
Obviously
right,
makes its
right,
way to
right.
Sandy Hook, right?
Yeah.
And now it's progressed so far that you've literally got multiple videos out that day of a dude stiffened up and being drug out, the hydraulic system spraying from
Mhm.
the bullets. and people are saying it's staged. When you see the reaction of, like, look, Trump is an actor. He's WWE style all the way, baby. Don't get me wrong. That wasn't no act. All right. And and to make it that way and mainline it is just bizarre. It's the inversion, right? Because they've demonized all those people. And look, I think those people are wrong, but they're able to say what they can. Now the mainstream is playing into this idea as if Trump needed to stage anything to me the most popular president of my lifetime.
Well,
Give me a break, Donald. Go ahead.
It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for him if that was the case. Because he's the only person I know that survived the shooting and somehow went down in the polls the first. But that doesn't make any sense to me. But I figured when that happened, okay, it's gonna be a cakewalk now. But again, it's the people, the inconsistency, the same people. These are the people that cheered on Alex Jones being prosecuted, that would love to prosecute any of us that question any of these other events. That it's the children and all that. But in this case, they instantly question this because Trump was involved. And it's because of the TDS and everything. They don't want to accept that he possibly could benefit from kind of sympathy or something like that. But however you look at it, whatever happened, it has not been investigated adequately because, again, having studied the JFK assassination like I have, very familiar with the Secret Service standing down. The Secret Service stood down completely that day. It was obvious. You had people telling,
It's
telling
bigger
the
than
BBC.
just them standing down. It's clear now, and it was from the very beginning. The shots at Trump were the first few. They engaged the shooter and shot him, and then they executed him 5 to 10 seconds afterwards to make sure that he never spoke again. And that's the reality. And no one's talking. Christopher Wray's talking about 8 bullets from the shooter. Give me a break. The book is American Memory Hole: How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. Donald will have to do another hour some other time. We really do appreciate you. And we appreciate you guys watching this show right here on Patriot.tv, where the truth lives 5 days a week. Remember this guy, it is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I love you guys. We'll see you on the flip side.